Welcome to the How Soccer Explains Leadership podcast, where we explore leadership principles through the lens of the beautiful game.
Welcome back to How Soccer Explains Leadership. I'm Phil Dark, your host, and with me as usual now, it's not, I don't even need to say as usual anymore because it is just now the norm. We got Paul Jobson, my co-host, and it's been a little bit since we've recorded something, but since we've recorded, also was at the United Soccer Coaches Convention. Unfortunately, Paul, you weren't able to be there. But Paul, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. It's as usual, except for at the United Soccer Coaches Convention. That was not as usual. So
that's true.
But yeah, no, it's been good, man. I missed the convention, literally missed it physically, and just missed it. It's always a fun time. So I'm jealous of the interactions you got to have with everybody there and the fun people you got to meet. But obviously, my kids took priority, and I spent the time at a wrestling tournament. So that was fun too. And we can maybe talk about that another time. But things are going well here, ramping up by the time this broadcast is a broadcast or posts.
It just airs, releases, whatever. We can,
when it comes out on cassette tape, by the time it comes out on cassette tape, we would have been to and already back from Guatemala. So we're ramping up for that. We leave tomorrow morning to visit our partners down there. So looking forward to that. And so things are just rolling along, man, here in 2023. But I'm enjoying the as usual moments on How Soccer Explains Leadership.
Yeah, it's a blast. It's a blast, and I was very bummed that you weren't able to join us, but I was able to say, hey, you're a man that's true to your word, and you retired from coaching so you could be more present with your kiddos and being able to do that. I was glad you were able to do that with your son, and I'm sure he loved it as well. I'm sure it was great family time.
It was a blast.
Yeah, we will talk about that some other time. We now have my new friend. I did meet him at the convention. We got Steve Axtell. He's a coach, he's a father, he's a husband. He does a lot of different things. We're going to talk about that today. And just to hopefully we'll be able to, learn more about leadership, about how we can incorporate different things into our game. Steve was able to speak at the United Soccer Coaches Convention on leadership and culture because he's been able to develop that in his job at Cortland University. So, Steve, how you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Well, as usual, and I keep saying that because it is something that we do all the time now, is we get to hear stories, and it's something that in our stories are so many lessons, and so we just like to start out each show with our guests just sharing their story. Most people out there don't know who you are. I had the pleasure of having a nice conversation with you at the convention, but can you share that story with our audience, just, really how you developed your passion for soccer, for coaching, for leadership in your life today?
Yeah, certainly. I think that the question's funny all the time when, tell us your story, and instantly my brain goes to well, which one? I've got 20, just depending on what context you're in. But in terms of just passion for soccer, probably a very typical passion for soccer. I had an older brother that played, so at a young age, really looked up to him. I was chasing him around, physically and mentally, and all the things that happens with the sibling dynamic. And so he was a soccer player, he was a goalkeeper. So it turned out to be I was a soccer player and a goalkeeper, probably right around 5, 6, started in rec programs and getting involved. And I did a lot of different sports. When I was a kid, I loved being active, but I never really saw my brother play a lot of different sports. We were 10 years apart. So by the time I really, have memories of him, he was probably picked and choose which ones he really liked. And so I saw him playing soccer all the time. And so that kind of turned into my thing too. We lived out in the middle of nowhere. So our nearest neighbor was a mile away. So I didn't have neighborhood kids to play with. So part of falling in love with soccer was also just falling in love with the ball. Just juggling, kicking it off walls, around stumps and trees and things like that. So kind of had just this, it was my escape, right? So when there was no friends to play with, or, if it was kind of a boring time, I would go outside and I could do that, and that would keep me occupied. So kind of fell in love with it, I guess, in a couple different ways. So that was really my start in the game.
Yeah, and then how'd you get into just really being super passionate about leadership and training others on leadership?
Yeah, it's hard to tell when those exact moments are, I guess. For a long time, I was really just selfish in my development as a player. I just loved the game and I loved playing. So coaching wasn't really on the front of my mind until right around the start of college, when everybody starts asking those questions, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? But so I had probably a couple different pathways to falling in love with coaching. So one, just from a parent standpoint, my mother was a teacher. second grade teacher. So I kind of grew up in that teaching environment, hearing the stories about her classes and what's going well and what's frustrating her and all of that type of stuff. I mean, even when you're not listening, you're listening, right? Like as a kid to your parents. And so definitely that was like a start of perhaps like a teaching path, whether it was in soccer or whatever that would be. So I actually started my freshman year in college in childhood ed. So that was going to be my path, and just going to kind of follow those footsteps. I always kind of had a knack for younger kids, and like we were in a small town, and so it was natural that all the younger kids kind of idolized the older kids, certainly in sports, and look up to them. So I had coached at a lot of camps, helped at a lot of the rec programs and things back or things, and tried to give back. So teaching was kind of natural, and that was going to be my path. My father was in the military, and so we had a very kind of strict and regimented and routine household, which was also that kind of yin to the yang of my mother. And so those things, I didn't have a soft approach, I would say, to teaching and all that, which is why I love the game. And then finally, that third piece was probably a really strong mentor of mine that I remember the day that I learned you could coach full time, like that could be a job. And instantly, like my head exploded, and it was like I opened the world. And that kind of really fit who I was, that like drive to be competitive and drive to do what I wanted to do in the game. And then now I kind of had this almost like sense of relief that, okay, when that's done, I can stay in the game and I can have all of these different things and I can be a teacher like I wanted to be. So I would say those three things really is like, that was at the crux of coming up with that coaching passion.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I want to go back to real quick, and this is becoming an as usual question as well, but you talked about playing multiple sports, and that's something that today is becoming less and less common. It used to be most people did it, almost everybody, when we were kids. What do you think is missing from the kids' lives now today, both developing as athletes, but also just in life, in their development as humans, from not playing multiple sports and just kind of specializing so early?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of right in the middle, because I do think there's benefits to, like if you look at international kids that aren't playing, I mean, the really top end ones turn out just fine. Maybe not well-rounded because I don't know them personally, but what we see from the outside looking in from a soccer side of things turns out fine. And I don't know about injury rates in other countries and things like that. So I don't want to like totally just paint this really broad stroke over it. But in our country, I do think the coaching that kids get at a really young age, I think our best coaches in this country go to the highest levels and work with the oldest players. And that's kind of like a trend. Whereas perhaps in other countries, they put best coaches with young ages that are still developing and maybe teaching them more movement patterns and things like that. So there's a lot at play here, but certainly, you become more well-rounded, hand-eye develops with foot-eye and all of your coordination and movement patterns. So kids miss that. If you're only going to do one thing, you probably get pretty good at one thing, but that's got a pretty distinct set of boundaries on it. I think it doesn't give kids the opportunity to fail in something else. And so, if you're a soccer kid that ends up soccer is your sport and you turn out quite good at it, you've probably always been quite good at it. And, that social dynamic on a team, you've always been towards the top of the team and so on. And just so, that's pretty linear, like that experience is probably the same. If you're the top player on a team, that probably looks and feels really similar all across the country, right? Just from a social standpoint. So if you put yourself in a position where you're in sports that you're maybe not as good at, or you're middle of the roster, or maybe even you're bottom of the roster, you're a sub, you have to come off the bench. I just think those lessons are great. It rounds out your perspective of what athletics is. And so, when you go to your team and you are the top kid, now you know how maybe the bottom of the roster feels, and you're a little bit better leader and you treat them a little bit different, and you have different connections there because kind of build your empathy, right, towards like the entire group of kids that you're on a team. So I definitely think we miss that. I mean, right now, we're working on that with our oldest daughter. She's 13. I think if you asked her, she would say she's a soccer kid, but right now she's playing volleyball, and, all that comes with that, she's learning it. And there's been kids that have been playing it far longer than her. And, just that struggle of her being a sub, her not starting, and just kind of working through the mental stuff with her. Right now, it's difficult in the moment for her, but my God, I mean, we're thankful that that's happening, because when she's 16, 17, 18, goes off to college, is in the real world, having that experience and empathy for kind of understanding roster dynamics, it's just going to serve her well. So I think we're missing that, certainly just the dynamic of being good or not as good and having to work harder at certain things. In terms of just, exact injury rates and all that, I don't know. I don't know exactly how well we can like pinpoint, which sports we should play and shouldn't play, and how to exactly do it. But there's also just a sense of like play that I think we're missing, and so some of it, we just talk about kids having the opportunity to play multiple sports. I don't know. I feel like when we grew up, I was playing basketball in my friend's driveway, and then we were playing roller hockey, and then we were throwing a football around. And so I think just the sense of play, uninhibited, unstructured play, I think kids are missing too, because, we tend to just kind of fill their evenings with structured things, and, weekends are on the road. Travel has gotten more, so the club teams, you're traveling 2 hours for a game now, which I don't know, when I was growing up, it was 20 minutes, and so there's pros and cons, but I think we're missing the social piece, the empathy piece of just kind of understanding your teammates more, putting yourself in positions to fail, and then just that sense of play.
Yeah, there's so much there. We could go for days and days, but we don't have that.
It could be a whole topic.
Yeah, there's a whole show on that. But Steve, not to just rush by it. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, that just the idea of just getting out and playing. Something we deal with our own children is, hey, I don't need to script your day when it comes to your activities. Just go figure something out. There's plenty of stuff to do. Figure it out. And I think to your point of team dynamics, I also think that you've got your top 1% that they're the best and they're always going to be the best and they're going to play as long as they can play. But the reality is, for the other 99% of us, at some point, we're not the best. As you continue to go up, and I mean, you see it, you coach college, there's the kid that's always been the best, and they show up on your team, and all of a sudden they might be the middle of the pack. If they haven't experienced that maybe in another sport, they have no idea how to handle that. So your point is, I think, right on with that. Sometimes the other sports, playing some things maybe they're not as good at, they understand those team dynamics, not only for empathy for players on their team when you're the best, now you understand, but at some point maybe you're not the best, and you're like, oh man, okay, I've sat the bench before. It was sixth grade basketball, but I remember what this is like, so I think those are some important details that come with the multi-sport stuff. But, I love hearing our guest stories. Everyone's so unique and so different. I love at some point maybe we compile all everybody's stories and put together an end of the year fill of like just the lead-in stories of everybody and what, how everybody got to where they're going. But there's always the path of like how we get where we are. And as you kind of define who you are as a coach, always also like to hear, like, what is your why? Like, what is your personal why in life and your purpose, and how are you living that out now?
Yeah, great question. So I probably have two distinct whys. And I think sometimes we all try and like make up whys that are just really like gorgeous, when we talk about them. And
well, we like gorgeous whys, Steve. Gorgeous whys are great, but the real ones are better. So if you got two really good ones,
so like some real ones is, I do have an ego. I've tried to understand my ego more as I get older. I had that like competitive drive when I was a player that would really boil over at times. And so that's part of maturing, is just kind of like really digging in and unpacking who you are and how to deal with that, what you personally need to meditate on and things like that. So I would say that's evolved into just really striving towards excellence in everything, like being ultra competitive. In my program here at Cortland, we talk about winning everything, like absolutely everything. And it's not just games, but it's moments, it's interactions, it's relationships, it's in the classroom. And, I'm trying to get our guys to kind of assign like a 1 or a 0 to all these small moments throughout the day. And as far as like, did you walk past a piece of trash, know that you should pick it up and didn't, right? That's a 0, that's a loss. So I've been able to like kind of be pretty concrete in turning my competitive drive into everything in life, and understanding that competitive drive doesn't have to have an intensity about it all the time, but it has to be really intentional. You have to be present, like, so if you're going to walk by that piece of trash, for example, you can't be on your phone. right? Because now you're not even seeing it, and so I think I've just been able to really kind of bring everything a little bit more towards that nucleus of winning and competitive, but also that doesn't have to mean intense. It doesn't have to, mean some of those harsher words. It can be empathy, right? It can be, did a kid come into my office with a problem, and did I listen well enough, right? Instead of just wanting to give them the answers. So, and then when they leave, like really self-examining, say, you know what, I probably needed to listen more there. Maybe that's a loss. So that's probably one, just striving for excellence, striving to win kind of all the small moments in my day. And then two, I'll just say like that impact, giving that to our players, because I know when I was their age, there's a lot of things that I do that didn't really map towards all of my aspirations, right? Everything was really scattered, and it was kind of away from the core, some of the things, and some things did map, but trying to get them to figure out that life is just so interconnected, right? And like your success on the field is really driven by what you do off the field, and how mentally clear you are, and how clear your conscience is. And, and all these different pieces are actually, part of that recipe for performance. So I'd say that that's definitely another one, is just like giving that, and trying to impact players that are in these, moments of life altering kind of paths and big decisions that they need to make, just kind of like putting that positive impact on them, essentially trying to show them what I've learned 15 years earlier, right? And maybe saving some kids or helping them connect the dots. So
Yeah, we always love asking that, just to hear what makes people tick and how you're kind of just what's driving you, and that helps us. I think it colors a lot of the rest of the conversations, and it also helps people understand why you do certain things too. So hopefully your players understand that, know that that's what's driving you, and that then helps them understand you better. Those who know me know that I'm all about trying to understand myself better so that I can understand others better, and we can communicate better, and that helps everybody. But one of the other things we want to chat about a little bit is what was a defining moment, like just one of the key defining moments in your soccer career, and why was it so impactful? What did you learn from it, and again, how are you using that today as you coach?
Yeah, so from a coaching lens, certainly there's probably two really big ones. One of them is, I think I was a U16, U17 player, and had gotten kind of more and more opportunities with the regional team, which, back then there wasn't all the MLS Academy. So this was like a big opportunity for me. And this was, something I was striving for and all that. And I actually climbed high enough where I met a coach, and you get to be around different coaches, right? And so that's one of the benefits too. But so I met a coach that like just chewed me up and spit me out mentally. Player wise, I think I fit. Mentally, it was a disaster. Like I couldn't survive in that environment. So it ended up not working out. And so I think that was kind of the moment that I knew I wasn't going to be a pro. And there was like a harshness to the game at upper levels, because that's the only upper level I had seen. And it came with just this nasty bite to it from a coaching side. So I equated those two things. And so that was kind of like the moment where I'm kind of like, okay, maybe I'm not mentally built for climbing to the very top, regardless of what my physicality is going to do. And so with that came, lack of confidence and kind of questioning a lot of things. But so then I carried that moment into, coaching. That coaching lesson is like, you have to coach the individual, not who you are. You have to coach how they're going to receive it, right? And so part of that is I always question, what would have happened at upper levels had I met a coach that was maybe just fit me better. And so then I kind of started really studying coaching when I got into the field, and understood that there's a lot of different coaches, and there's like really empathetic coaches at the top level, right? Like the top level didn't need to come with a harshness, right? Like those two things weren't tied together or married together. So that was pretty neat. Just that whole process of, what I thought it was as a 16, 17-year-old, what I learned that it could be, and it didn't have to be that. And then just kind of how I was going to use that to coach on a very individual, communicate really individually. And we can get in later, but just like personality testing our players. Like we do a lot of these, just kind of like, you had talked about, Phil, like understanding yourself to then understand your environment better. I mean, we just pour over that type of stuff with our college guys. So that's probably one. Number two is let's see, probably June, I think it was junior year of college. I had a knee reconstruction. I did ACL, MCL, PCL, kind of the whole thing. I mean, it was just a mess. So, that was an entire year off. So I was on the sideline. The coach at the time, I was fortunate that I was part of a program that, he wanted me around as much as possible, probably for the mental side of things. So I went through the rehab, but I was also on the sideline all the time, helping, set cones, pick up cones, and, asking questions to the staff and just seeing the game through a different lens. But then when I was done, I got to go reuse those lessons as a player, which was pretty neat. So it was almost like an atypical path of I went from playing to coaching, quote unquote, you could call it, back to playing again. So that was really neat. That was an opportunity for, taking what you're going to learn through a different lens, but then you get to apply it again. So those are probably two really big moments in my coaching journey.
Yeah, let's stay in that vein of, you're talking through some of the different coaches that were influences on you. Is there one in particular? And you mentioned, the impact that maybe, I don't want to say a bad coach, but one that was a little bit more brutal to you, and another one maybe that had a little bit more empathy to you. Is there one coach though in your entire career, in any part of your career, that really stands out as being what you consider to be your best coach, and what set that coach apart from the rest, and what lessons have you brought into your own coaching? I know I was coached by a lot of different people. I had some bad coaches, and I brought some great things into my coaching personality from them. And I had some great coaches that I wanted to get as much as I could from them as well. But I know I've got one that stands out for me. What about yourself?
I think I've got a bunch for different facets, for different reasons. I have a mentor that got me into coaching, and, he was one that really, that's who I needed at 18.
Mm-hmm.
I was working summer camps, and, just to take it more serious, and, the level of care that you have to bring to the job, even though it's a really underpaid summer camp position, just that importance of working with children, right? So that was one, and just his attention to detail, his mantra all the time was, it's all about the kids. I've probably heard that out of his mouth 10,000 times, not kidding. So that was one, just the how devoted you have to be to trying to be great for children, right? So that was one. He had that to a T. My two goalkeeper coaches when I was a young kid, when I started in 12 years old, just their inspiration to want more. So helping me really fall in love with the game, not just loving it, but this is now an identity, and I want to go after that. And so, those two for that. My college coach, he was a great person, right? So if there was a human that you wanted to look up to, that was him, right? And so, yeah, I would say that there's probably 3 or 4 just amazing coaches that I can pull facets of them and say, yeah, those were big time lessons to be learned.
Yeah. What's interesting is we ask that question quite a bit. And I think I always come back to the fact that hardly ever does anybody reference the coach that taught them the most about the X's and O's as their biggest influence, even in coaching. When our job, you would think, is, hey, know the game really, really well, be able to disseminate that information to younger players so that they can be excellent in the craft. That's never usually what a coach says about their greatest influence as a young player or a coach. It's usually those personal things that make them fall in love with the game, make them fall in love with what it means to be a great mentor. Because I think in some realm, we're starting to lose the idea that coaching is about mentoring, and it's just about coaching. And it's here's the X, here's the O, possess the ball, blah, blah, blah. No, it's the kids come first, right? And I love your perspective. I love the nuggets that we pull from all of our coaches, but I want the listeners to maybe rewind that and go back and listen again to the things that influenced you the most of great coaches that are making you into a great coach, right? We just take bits and pieces from the good and bad of our experiences, and not once did you say, this person just really taught me the X's and O's of the game, and that's why I want to be a great coach. And I think that's just a great perspective to kind of look at a little bit. I don't know if you've got more to add to that. I'd love to hear it.
No, for sure. I think you're totally right. And I actually if someone were to ask me what my weakness is as a coach, it's the X's and O's. It's the tactic. I don't value it as much, to be fair. I can't tell you the last time I went and sought that out from a mentor, because on my list of priorities as a coach in my role here, even though we are highly competitive and we're winning all the time, I don't attribute the X's and O's and the whiteboard stuff to winning at all. I don't think it really matters. I think at the end of the day, it's a pretty pragmatic approach. Like there's 11 of us and 11 of them, and we have to figure out together how we're going to go do it. So like, we don't have a formation here. We don't have like a style. We have just, figure each game out as it comes together, figure each other out, like more, I guess, like an environment coach rather than an X's and O's coach, for sure. But I would also echo that I truly believe that you can find the negative in everyone, right? Or things that aren't working in their environment. And so, I've got like 3 or 4 like really big time facets that I look up to that I think were great, like positive influences. But I also don't have this belief that myself or anyone is perfect, right? Like no one is the exact replica of what you should try to do. And I think, too often we think we're a finished product, or, the players want to emulate everything that you do, right? They're either like so enthralled with it, but you're kind of like, you have to figure out you first, and then the pieces that you need to try and emulate, and then maybe the pieces that you already have. So yeah, I think coaching is a lot of like figuring yourself out, from a grand scope, and then taking small pieces, right? Like instead of a broad stroke of that's exactly who I want to be and I'm going to emulate everything that they do, take the pieces that you need and then leave the pieces that you don't. And then you end up being more of yourself, I think, at the end of that process.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, and I do as well. I mean, it's why we're doing this show, right? Is this idea of, most of the training coaches get is the vast majority, not even close, is X's and O's. It's the practice plans. It's, the field sessions. It's how to do this and where to put the cones and how to do the whatever things. And obviously that's necessary. But I'm with you where, I go out to a practice and I'm thinking, how can I get the most out of these girls in my case with the high school girls that I'm coaching, and the people side is everything to me. And I think they perform better. They know that, at certain level, at the levels that we're talking about, most of these kids are where they're going to be as not where, I mean, they'll obviously improve, but they've heard all the stuff, right? They know it. Are they doing it on their own? All those, that's going to be driven by a lot of other things that go outside of the X's and O's. But with that, you at the United Soccer Coach Convention, we mentioned this earlier, you had a talk that you kind of brought all of this together that we're talking about, and you put together a talk on leadership and culture, and I think you did a couple talks there, but one was on leadership and culture. Can you just briefly share, obviously we don't have an hour right now for you to go through the whole presentation and do everything, but can you briefly share on what you talked about, and then we just kind of go through it a little bit. Why is it important, what you talked about, why is it important for coaches and teams to understand it?
Yeah, certainly. So I'll give you the quick spark notes of it. Essentially we want to use our culture to help give a really kind of foundation for our mindset, which is how we perceive the world. And, you take your mindset and then, something happens and then you decide what that means to you. And then you move back to your mindset in terms of, okay, now there's going to be another action, and that process keeps going. But I think, and we've got a graphic here with my team, that culture also affects mindset. So it's not just presenting situation and what you feel about it, but there's just an underlying, the stories that you tell yourself about yourself, right? Like essentially is culture. So that's why we want to use culture to get on a pretty ground floor foundational mindset page with everybody, and just, what does life mean and what's it going to mean to us and together. We want to use culture to be high performing. So part of high performing is, for us, our big pillars are kind of communication and interaction, roles, responsibilities, and expectations. And then I would just say kind of like who you are when you're not in the group matters to us a lot too. And that's part of our culture, is not just who you are as a, Cortland soccer player, but everything that you do throughout the day, right? Those little wins and losses and the small moments are going to add up to really like who we are and how we're perceived, which is then going to change the story we tell ourselves. So we want to try and cement all of those too. The ways that we do it, so the roles, responsibilities, and leadership development is we've got kind of 4 different focuses for each of our classes. So when freshmen come in, it's all about leading yourself. You don't need to worry about leading any other person. You just have to lead yourself. You got to make hard decisions throughout the day, etc. We break all of our lives into athletic, academic, and social here at the college, and we can kind of fit all the different decisions into one of those 3 pillars. They've got expectations for all those three pillars. Sophomore year is all about leading individuals. And so now it is your responsibility to help another person on a one-on-one basis. Some of that is proactive, it's just in terms of what you're trying to give. Some of it's reactive in terms of picking up on red flags and, maintaining our expectations one-on-one. Junior year is leading groups. So we give them kind of real world chances to lead smaller, bigger groups within the team. So for instance, like an example of that would be a junior each month will be the director of community service on our team. And so we'll meet with them before, just, what are your goals? What are your aspirations? What's important to you? How do you define impact? What do you want to do in the community? Then they go do it for a month. We don't make any phone calls. We are totally hands off. You're free to fail if you want. And then we meet at the end and just say what went well, what didn't, what would you change? And then we meet with those two players together, the one that just did it and then the next one to say, hey, do you have any advice? What would you do different? How would you help this person in that role? And then senior year is leading the team. And it's really just kind of like managing our whole pyramid, helping guys with character development and just, being humble. And we call it like foster future leaders, like wanting the young kids to be great. So we have kind of like this saying in our program that like you just heard, like you're free to fail, like there is no safety net below you, because I think that goes into accountability and that's a good thing. But there's a lot of hands above you. If you want to reach up and strive with your life, we want to have a lot of older guys with, hands reaching down, ready to pull you towards better. And those are our seniors. So that's our leadership development. Then we get into that interaction communication. We do personality testing. We do 3 different ones: Myers-Briggs, True Colors, and the Big 5. I would say the majority of preseason, when we're not on the field, is done with the personality testing and just kind of who's who and learning about each other. I mean, that is like 90% of what we're doing off the field for about a week and a half. And then the last one is our character development sheet. So we've got 19 character traits that about 7 years ago, the team came up with the staff to say, this is what's important to us. Here's what we want to critique each other on. And essentially it's this rubric where you go and you critique all your teammates. You give them a 1 or a 0, whether they have that trait or not. And we do that 4 times a year. So each kid, by the time they're done with us, will have 16 of those peer assessments and character traits. The expectation is that your numbers continue to get better, not worse. We've actually cut kids that continue to get worse, which just for us means you're not buying in, right? Like you're not trying to give those positive character traits to your teammates. And so those were kind of like the 3 pillars of the presentation: leadership, interaction, communication, and then that character development. And then kind of how do we just tie it all together here. So yeah, those are the not short, but mid-range spark notes.
Yeah, that was great. I love how you do that. Now I had the benefit of being able to go through your presentation and and see it, and there's a lot of visuals. I mean, you see the pyramid and just that idea of the different levels of leadership, and those are all the things you've heard. If you listen to this show, you hear about as we talk about whether it's coaching the bigger game program and leading yourself, leading the individual, leading the team. Those are all critical. And can you speak to that a little bit more as far as the fact that I always talk to people about, you can't, if you are as a coach, from the coaching perspective, but also from the player perspective, but let's say from the coach perspective, we have a lot of coaches listening. We also have a lot of leaders of organizations listening. And what I talk about is if you as a coach are toxic, then your team will be toxic. If you as if the individual, if one, especially one that's very influential, it goes to you cutting players who are continually getting worse. If one is toxic, then the team will very likely be toxic. And then obviously, but we tend to start with the culture of the team, right? Like we as a team, that's usually where we go to when we say we want to teach culture. So first of all, do you agree with that? Secondly, how are you pouring into the individual as you're talking about the freshmen or others too? I can imagine it doesn't just stop as a freshman, but how are you teaching that self-leadership, which I think is so often neglected in our coaching?
Yeah, certainly. So a lot to unpack there. I think there's like a hierarchy of leadership within a group. Not that you have a lesser role, but you have a different role. And it's very sequential. They're almost like prereq. So if you can't lead yourself, right, how are you then going to influence one other person in the right direction? Doesn't mean you're not going to have influence, right? I mean, you get some mavericks on the team that just have natural influence for sure. But if we're not catching them in terms of the direction that they're going first, then now they're leading actually in the wrong way. And so then your culture just kind of self-implodes. And I think there's a guy, Jordan Peterson, has a podcast in psychology type of stuff. And I like, one of the things that I like from him is just that, like, clean your room, and like, how are you going to affect change in the world if you can't keep your room clean type of thing, and it, not that my room is spotless all the time, but just it talks about just that, take care of yourself first, right? Figure yourself out before you then just try and branch out, and don't get ahead of yourself. So that's kind of like at the crux of, just that hierarchy of leadership. But we tell them that, like, you're all leaders, right, on our team. And we want you to feel like you're leading. We want you to feel like you're having an impact. As a freshman, you have to have an impact on yourself, right? Sophomores, you have to impact on one person. So I think it also doesn't make leading the team this daunting task when you get there, right? Of like, oh my God, I've done nothing and now I'm being asked to do everything. So it's really sequential in the amount of responsibility that you have towards the group, right? You start with, pretty much none. You start with yourself. You get a little bit. Now we get to give you some opportunities to lead a little bit larger groups and what works and what doesn't work. And then that doesn't seem like a daunting task. And I actually created that in 2012 when I took over. I was really young. And so I'd have a lot of talks with coaches of, how do you run your program? And just trying to soak all that up. And once in a while I would hear coaches, I just don't have great senior leadership this year. I don't have great captains this year. It never made sense to me because my devil's advocate brain always went to like, well, you've had them for 3 years. Why not? Like, what have you not done? And so I wanted to make sure that I was never in that position, because if that's the way that my mind is going to work, then let's create a system where I don't ever have to say that, right? Like, I'm proud of all of our seniors, no matter, if they get there, man, I mean, that's an achievement in and of itself. So yeah. I forget, remind me there was a part 2 to this, but that's, I think, the sequential hierarchy of it and why it works.
Part 2 of the question, you mean?
Yeah, there was a 2-part and I forget what it was.
It was basically how, why it's important for the players, self-leadership, and then just the toxicity of teams that happens if we're not able to lead ourselves. But then the teams tend to start with the culture, team culture, and they ignore that individual leadership side.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So I think that just goes to, like, you're going to end up with kids that are leading in the wrong direction if you just start with the big picture. It's why when I took over, I actually had to cut like 4 or 5 players that were teammates of mine, friends of mine, because they weren't what the team needed. And, if I just bowed down to kind of, well, we'll just let them kind of graduate through the program, well, then I would have had 18-year-old eyes on them thinking, okay, this is how things go here. And this is the right answer. And then 4 years later, they would have been the seniors doing the same thing. So,
yeah,
I think that's why turning a program around is a hard thing to do. I think you've got to let go of the ones that are intentionally pulling the rope in different directions. I think, when I took over here, it was like, look, you're welcome to stay. We would love to have you stay, but here's the rope, here's the direction. Your hand is on it and you're pulling. And, there's not going to be a moment when your hand is off this rope pulling in a different direction. This is where we want to go and this is what we're going to do. If your hand comes off the rope, see you later. Rope's still moving, we'll leave you behind. So I think that accountability piece towards your culture and that intentionality, it's never a finished product. I mean, you're just always working on it. You're always trying to make it better just to maintain it, because if you turn your eyes for a second, it's a whole different world. If you're not expecting, if you're not inspecting and holding kids accountable for your expectations, it'll go sideways pretty quick.
Yeah, and I remember about 109 episodes ago, there was a guy that looks a lot like Paul Jobson that I interviewed about culture, and I remember Paul said in that interview that he basically created the culture so that as it goes and goes and goes and grows and it becomes part of just who they are, that it becomes self-enforcing as well. That the players are the ones who are enforcing it, not, the coaches can not just sit back and do nothing, but can just be there to, make sure that nothing goes sideways. But for the most part, the players are doing it. Have you found that as well?
Yeah, that is tough though, because, I think as the world changes for them, they're on their phones more, which means they're communicating, but not connecting as much. They're not good at hard conversations face to face, things that need to be said that they don't want to because they're fear it's going to ruin a relationship, or, just whatever that face-to-face interaction is going to be. So yes, it's definitely able to be a sustaining model, but you have to make sure that you're continuing to keep up with your kids about the actions and daily habits that allow it to be continual, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
not changing our expectations, not, it's never an overhaul, but it's, hey, here's the daily habits that are going to help us maintain it, and it is calling out a teammate when they're not living up to what, we stand for and things like that. It is, and that's face to face. It's not via text message. It's not behind their back. I mean, that's more damaging, but
right.
Being that front facing, hey, I care about you so much that I'm going to tell you, you're not doing well. Right. And this isn't good enough. That's a level of care, but they don't get that. They don't understand that until someone's driving that point home for 4 years straight. So yes, it definitely can be self-sustaining. We found that it's easier in the past, maybe 4 years, now that I'm 10, 11 years in, but it's definitely something that we have to keep, hammering those harder habits, and not letting them just be comfortable in how they want to interact with each other.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Steve, you even hit it on the head when you said inspecting, right? I mean, I think as you're changing a culture, I mean, there's things that you'll do or not do based on the culture that you're trying to set. And as you've set it and it kind of is self-propelling a little bit, you have to inspect, because as culture changes and as personalities within a team change, the dynamics change constantly. I mean, you're always players in, players out. So things are constantly changing. So I agree. The inspection piece, we always said, we want to get to the point where we've got guardrails and we're there to make sure that kids stay on that road. They've got a road ahead of them. It's paved, it's ready to go, but we've got to keep those guardrails up and make sure that you use the word inspecting. I kind of think that's the same. Like, hey, we got to keep our finger on it to make sure that we're not losing sight. And one thing you mentioned earlier, you said with the points that you put together with your team, it was 6 or 7 years ago, you guys came up with things that were important to your culture and to your team. Over those 6, 7 years, have any of those things changed as cultures have changed, so to speak, or have you had to put more heavier emphasis on certain things as, phones have become more prominent, as, people not interacting face to face as much? How has that piece of that changed for you?
The words that we use have not changed, and I haven't had any reason to change them. I think those have been consistent and pretty rock solid, and they're not all in one category. There's a lot of different words there. So
yeah,
and just like character traits,
I've seen it. I like the list, by the way. I've seen it. It's good.
Yeah, it's a variety of words. But what happens is each year in each different group, they'll have. So when we rank order the kids, we also rank order the character traits, right? And so what's our team's worst character trait? What's our best character trait, right? So we can do that with the spreadsheet too. Our best and worst character traits as a team, those change, certainly, and then that gives us a really good idea, an inside look from a staff perspective of maybe things that we need to work a little bit harder on to try and help them, give them tools, like in the last couple of years since COVID, actually, like the confidence level, interesting enough, has gone through the roof of they're just not good at confidence, right? And that's self-inflicted, they're talking about that. They're, identifying teammates that are not confident. So that's been our team's highest character trait flaw for the last 2 years, which is interesting to note. I don't have enough data and time to exactly pinpoint a why that is, but it is. And so it's a great little inside look from a staff. They're like, okay, well, if that's our weakest trait, let's help them with that. Let's teach them more about confidence. Let's teach them how you get confidence. Right. And some of them don't even know what it is. Some of them think it's this outward projection of yourself, and so teaching them, maybe you just need more repetition. Maybe you need more time spent. Maybe you think you should be confident, right, in this environment, when reality, you're just learning and it's part of the process. Maybe you're having some down days and you think that now your confidence is hit. Maybe that's normal, right? Maybe it's just all part of the process. Maybe you could just give yourself a little bit more grace and not act as if you're not confident, right? Because maybe those two things aren't linked. So anyways, yeah, it gives us a good look into who our team is and what we need to adjust. But the words themselves, no, those are pretty rock steady.
Yeah, that's good. And I think sometimes over time, you kind of mentioned a little bit, people, as they're coming through, their definition of those words might change slightly. And you're probably having to redefine what those things are. And we talked a lot about with our group that confidence is a tough thing to sometimes determine, right? I mean, kind of as you were kind of mentioning, and we just say, sometimes you just need to be determined. and build kind of, you said, repetition of things and whatnot. But I love those insights. I would encourage folks to get in and reach out to you to learn more about those things. I know as a former coach, those are things that were just classical, great nuggets to have and learn from. And even you said there's so many different things out there. Like we were saying about mentors and coaches, you want to pull as much as you can from different people to figure out what fits best into the culture you're trying to build and establish, for sure. And as we're kind of getting to the end, all these conversations can go on for hours and hours and hours. And Phil, I think every time we're like, man, let's do a part 2 and a part 3 with different guests. Steve is one to maybe get on the list again for sure to dive deeper. But as we kind of wrap up, Steve, and kind of go into the bottom of this, we ask very similar questions. But as you've gone through life and through soccer and through coaching, what are the lessons that you've learned directly? And we talk about family, what are the lessons you've learned through the sport that you put directly into like your family, your marriage, raising kids? You mentioned you have at least a 13-year-old daughter, maybe a couple other kids. How do the life lessons of soccer fit into your family life?
Yeah, certainly. And our 2 others, they're 5 and 10, 3 daughters. So, and interesting enough, my wife is the women's soccer coach here at our school. So we actually have 2 coaches that are parenting together, which is interesting. And I'd say
try being on the exact same staff for a number of years. That's what we did. But I love the family dynamic. That's awesome.
Yeah, what's interesting. So, we're so wrapped up in it that it's hard to compartmentalize the difference between life and soccer, right? I just think life is life, and this is what we do. And so our kids can't get away from it, right? We can't get away from it. And so it's all kind of interconnected. I've become, I'm the mentor that I had when I was working at a summer camp really helped me understand the importance of small moments with children, right? And like how easily you can break mindsets and confidence in their own self-identities, right? And how quickly you can change those and be inspirational. So trying to be intentional in, building confidence in our girls and our daughters, giving them words that, don't have to do with talent, but with hardworking and self-confidence and a lot of that type of stuff. So that way they have growth mindsets. And a lot of like the coaching literature with young kids is just, that is parenting too. And so definitely that, trying to become a great parent by not being a bad coach, right? And like, I remember having sessions as a young coach where I'm like, man, if I could do that again, I would, because that sucked, right? Like they deserved better. Just taking that and like analyzing life in the same way of like, I should have listened more. I should have whatever. So certainly taking that into the parenting realm. My wife and I are kind of polar opposites in terms of personality. I'm super high energy and upbeat and just takes a lot to slow me down. And so, but just like on a team, you've got multiple things at play. And so when I'm trying to put our team together, it's trying to show them the best parts of themselves, right? And like how that helps our group, right? And like everyone has a role, and like our team wouldn't be the same without you, right? And like, and here's why: you've got so many great facets, and here's what you give to the team. My wife and I are no different. Her strengths are my weaknesses, and I'd say my strengths are probably her weaknesses too. And so just like knowing that from a coaching lens, that we just bring that into our household. And like, there's sometimes when I am really tired on a long day, I am stressed out, but I'm kind of the energy one of the house. And like, so I've got to give that to the house, right? Like that's my superpower, right? As a dad, is maybe like some of the energy and all of that and upbeat culture that we bring to the house. But then when that boils over, my wife is the one that kind of calms everyone back down and keeps us, it's that yin to the yang. And so, but I do think like treating your family like a team, everyone has their special traits that they bring, and they really have to try and bring those all the time. Then, everybody also has a dark side to them, right? That the, inner toxic that like you hopefully learn and mature out of, but like is still in there, right? Like, firm believer that good and evil runs right through the middle of everyone, and it's about learning yourself and like not putting certain things into the team at certain times. So treating our family as a team, I think that's been the number one thing. Is sometimes we're leaders, and sometimes we're the coach of our kids, but sometimes we're all 5 of us are on the same team, and how we interact, and letting our kids lead and letting them kind of have star of the show moments and all that. So yeah, it's all interconnected for sure.
As it was once said, football is life, right? So it's evident in, of course, all of our families, and I'm sure many of our listeners, it's the same. And I like that you kind of led with like, well, it's kind of all intertwined. I fully agree with that, and I think the more people kind of dive into it, they realize that it really is. It really is intertwined, and how we are at work and personalities and all that. It does overlap. We talk a lot in our family about team jobs, and I love how you said allowing our kids to lead at times. Like, I think that's important, kind of the example you gave with your team of there's not a safety net, but there's plenty of hands above you that you can reach up to. And I think as parents, we're that for our children. Hey, you're going to lead this. You have the influence in this moment. Go, fail now or succeed. We're here either way, but we're up here for you, not down below you, waiting to catch you when you fall. I just intertwined your entire interview together right there in that moment. But I love it.
Yeah. And especially with like the sibling birth order dynamic, right? So like our youngest, you got to give her times to make decisions for everybody. And then you got to get the two oldest ones. Is like, look, it's not your time, like you're in the backseat right now. Just because you're oldest doesn't mean you get to drive everything here. So yeah, definitely like same thing with teams, right? Like you want everybody to feel special in their own way. You want them to feel like they're contributing. You don't want just this like hierarchy of influence where it's just kind of like my role is to just sit down and shut up for a couple of years. And like, I don't really have a big role here. Like all those type of things that you want to try and squash in your team. It's the same with a family, and just knowing that, you have to have a partner that is a total teammate. Right. And so, one of my biggest things with my team is that hard conversations thing, right? And like that one-on-one, face-to-face, when you screw up, you need a teammate that cares about you so much that's going to tell you. My wife is that to a T, and not in like a joking around male, female, oh, my wife is always on me type of thing, but like true actual moments of my life, or even like, things that I said in a game or like just, she's like, you really screwed that one up. Like she's just brutally honest. But it's good because I always know she's right. Yep. It's never coming from a place of non-love. It's coming from a place that like, she just cares so much that like, and has that belief in me that's like, you have to hold each other accountable. And so finding yourself a teammate that can hold you accountable when you do slip a little bit, I mean, that is just big time.
Yeah. It's
huge.
priceless.
100% agree. Yep.
Yeah. And, I've never met your wife, but I met Marcy and I know my wife, and, I just think that we all have that, and it's very fortunate, very blessed in that regard, because, we talk about we have team meetings, and we talk about our team as well. And what's cool is I'm kind of a little bit ahead of you guys as far as the kids, and to see that when they grasp that and when they really understand it. And now my oldest is on a Youth with a Mission trip. She's in Nepal. She's trekking Nepal, doing some ministry stuff over there. And to see how the younger siblings are part of her, like they're with her, and we're getting pictures. We're doing FaceTime calls. My son, is at college, and to see how they're interacting, and to see how the older ones are leading the younger, and the younger are pushing and encouraging and loving. And what does that look like? And it's not perfect. It's messy. It's really messy, like any team. But to see that and to take these lessons, of resilience, of overcoming adversity, of being able to pour into each other, to do the disc training that we do, you talk about colors and all this, like be able to do that with our family. It's not perfect analogies, but it's something that if we're taking the things we're doing with our family to our coaching and vice versa, it'll make everything better. And you talk about it. I was laughing to myself when you're talking about your wife being brutally honest with you. I dissimilar in my wife, and I love it. Like you said, she knows me almost as well as, and probably better than I know myself. And a lot of times, because sometimes I'm delusional. And before sending out a post on social media, as simple as seemingly trivial as that, she's like, that's what you're writing, but what you're actually saying to them is this. And that's what they're hearing and receiving. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I never even thought about, so it's so important for us to have that humility too, and to have people that love us enough to tell us the things that are the really hard things to hear. So love that. All right, man. Well, all good things have to come to an end. So what the last question we have, what have you watched, read, or listened to that has most impacted your thinking on how soccer explains life and leadership?
Ooh, really good. Okay, a couple different facets. Again, from a book standpoint, I love the book Anti-Fragile, and it's a heavy read. So don't get into it if you're trying to crush it in a week. Really heavy read. I had to go through like 3 pages and then read those 3 pages again. But it's about this notion that we don't have a word for anti-fragile, right? We have a word for fragile. It breaks under stress. We have a word for resilient. Resilience is it stays the same under stress, but we don't actually have a word in common language about we get stronger when we have stress. And it's the same notion of weightlifting, right? Like you put more weight on, right? And that's a stress to your body, and then your body adapts, and eventually that becomes easier, and you get to that level. And there's plateaus of that, but certainly adding stress is not a bad thing. So I think in modern day, I think the word stress has a really negative connotation. I don't think it should. I think it's probably one of the reasons why we don't deal with stress well now. And people have this mental story about stress that they shouldn't have stress. So that's my number one. It's just about like stress is good. Stress is really good. There can be too much stress, you can break, but stress in the right environments and the right dosage it's just necessary, right? I mean, that is life. And getting stronger under stress, like just knowing that, and that's part of growth mindset, is that I can handle this. And actually this moment's going to make me stronger, and it's going to suck right now. Just like running, long races or lift, whatever task you're to do, those are stresses, and they're going to callous your mind and callous your body and all these different things. And so they're going to make you stronger. So that's my number one book. It's called Anti-Fragile. That I tell my team about it all the time. That's like kind of one of the things that we talk about all the time. It's Anti-Fragile. In terms of other, like maybe podcasts or like little sound bites, I really love Jocko Willink. I just think a lot of his like discipline type stuff is great. I also think the world needs a lot of discipline right now. I grew up in a disciplined house, so I really I look at that as kind of like a North Star. I like what my father brought to my life picture was just incredible from like a discipline and structure standpoint. And I think we're in a world where everybody makes a lot of emotional decisions, and everything is meant to feel good, and it's gone really soft. But the discipline of life, it's not always going to feel good. It's not always going to be great, right? You're not always going to have motivation, but here's the things that you need to do and should do, regardless of how you're feeling, I think is also a powerful message. So some of his podcasts, some of his like little sound bites, his books that he has are incredible. Those would be my two, that if I were going to give to people, Anti-Fragile, and then, a lot of the stuff that Jocko's putting out.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Awesome.
I appreciate his stuff as well. All right. Well, hey, thanks, Steve. Appreciate you being a part of the conversation, and just keep doing it, man. Keep at it, and keep encouraging and raising up the next leaders. So appreciate you.
Thank you guys. Yeah. And I listen to you guys like on repeat now on my drive to and from work. So thank you guys for having all different types of people on, because I'm probably learning 10 times more than I'm giving. So thank you guys.
Wow. I appreciate that.
Yeah. We are too. We're learning definitely way more than we're giving on this too. And that's the selfish piece of doing the podcast, right, Phil, is what we're getting out of this. I almost feel bad how much I'm getting out of this, but I love it. And I appreciate the things you have to say, Steve, for sure.
Yeah, it seems like we're getting master classes all the time, and just from these great leaders doing great things, and very, very grateful that we get to interview guys like you. So thanks a lot, man.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Well, thanks again for being a part of the conversation. Thank you for just, taking the time to listen, because it means that you're learning as well. You get to learn from these great people as well, and hopefully you're taking it and using it in your life. And on that note, we have, continually you can go check out Warrior Way Soccer and what Paul and Marcy are doing there. As he said, he's going down to Guatemala to continue the partnership there and then to grow those relationships. So check that out, warriorwaysoccer.com. Coaching the Bigger Game, we've been talking about it. We actually met with a few people at the convention, and we're going to be kicking off a cohort in the next month or so. So if you're interested in that, go to Coaching the Bigger Game. You can sign up there, and you'll get a demo, and then we'll reach out to you, and hopefully you can join in on that in the next month or so. And if you're interested in disc training, I was able to speak on that at the convention too, and reach out to me there. My email is in the show notes. All of this information, including the book, and we'll get Jocko's podcast as well on there, so you can go there and just click on those links. Just keep it simple for you. And as always, hope that you're taking what you're learning from this show and you're using it to be a better parent, a better spouse, a better friend, a better leader in all that you do. And you continually remind yourself that soccer does explain life and leadership. Thanks a lot. Have a great couple weeks.